Here's the truth that nobody in the investment community is telling you, and it is that nobody knows shit. Nobody knows where the economy will go. Nobody knows where the stock price will go. And I've got even data to support this claim. When you look at mutual funds, at actively managed mutual funds, right? Funds that have a lot of resources behind them, a lot of analysts behind them, that put a lot of resources behind all of this. They have their whole career behind picking the right stocks, composing the right portfolio. When you look at those actively managed funds, you see that 95% of them underperform their benchmark after fees. Okay, so you've got these experts that put their whole career on this, finding the right investments, and there's a 95% chance that just buying a low-cost ETF on the S&P 500 is going to perform better. That's pretty scary, right? So how likely is it that when you put your heart and soul into picking the right stocks, or when you follow a very great influencer, how likely is it that you are going to outperform the benchmark, the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq? It's very, very low. So don't put too much focus on this, on finding the right instruments. Don't put your whole strategy, your wealth building strategy around this. It's not gonna work. Now, why is this so hard? Why do most mutual funds underperform their benchmark? It's because, like with everything in life, it's the winner takes most. So one might expect, usually, right, intuitively, one might expect, okay, when you've got a bunch of companies in an index, half of them will underperform the index and half of them will outperform the index, right? And then you get your average index. But that's actually not the case. What's happening is that most companies underperform the index, and only a handful of companies outperform the index, but they outperform it that massively that it pushes up the whole index. So when you just randomly pick a stock within an index, you're very, very likely to actually underperform. So you have to be incredibly selective in picking your stocks. You can't just, build something from like 10, 20 companies and hope you will outperform the index. It's very, very unlikely. It's way more likely that you're underperforming because the very few outperformers, you might not have those on your list. Now, there are exceptions to this, right? It's not like nobody has ever outperformed the stock market ever consistently. There are obviously exceptions, and the most prominent of that is Warren Buffett, right? He was able to outperform his benchmark. I think at that time it was the Dow Jones. He was able to outperform it by like 20% per annum for like decades. Okay, so this is possible. Or let's say it more precisely, it was possible. If you now actually look at the Berkshire Hathaway price and you divide it by the S&P 500, you look at the relative valuation. How did Berkshire Hathaway, the company of Warren Buffett, actually outperform the S&P 500? You notice that since October of 2008, it's actually down versus the S&P 500 by 5%. It underperformed the S&P 500 in the last 14 years. So the best investor on earth that was able to outperform that consistently is not able to do so anymore. This obviously has several reasons. I think the two major ones is, first of all, he's got way more money to manage now. So these large companies, they are valued more efficiently. There are a lot of analysts on this. So picking the right company that's undervalued is way harder the larger you go in your betting size, so to speak, right? When you just handle with small companies, that's not necessarily the case. And the second reason is the stock market as a whole has become more mature, right? You've got way more access to information now with the internet. All of these things did not exist in the early days, right? Where you could just make some balance sheet analysis, some income statement analysis, and that's all you needed. And you could basically, if you just put in the effort, figure out the few little nuggets. Nowadays, that's way harder because there is way more manpower, way more technology behind this. I still think if you wanted to outperform the stock market, you should still rather look at the very small values, right? You shouldn't just look at Tesla or something. You should look at very small caps and try to figure out the fundamentals of these very small stocks. Then you might potentially outperform as Warren Buffett did. But it's definitely way harder today than it was 50 years ago. Now, that's why I think the focus should not necessarily be on trying to forecast where is the stock going to be. It shouldn't even be, the focus shouldn't even be on trying to forecast where the next year is going to lead us, right? I still like to do this. I like to look at interest rates. I like to look at inflation, what impacts inflation, etc. Try to anticipate how monetary expansion or tightening might lead us to then the valuation of risk on and risk off assets. It's fun to do this, but you're not going to generate a massive edge, massive alpha out of this. Even Warren Buffett tries not to predict the macro, right? He just tries to buy solid businesses. What I think is important in all of this is if you try to outperform, it's probably much easier instead of trying to pick the very few winners, right, that skew the whole result. If you try to outperform, you try to pick the losers because there are way more of them, right? There are way more underperformers. So what you can do is you can look for small caps where you think those small caps are relatively hopeless to outperform in the future. And you can then trade the relative valuation. Okay, so you can short, you can bet on falling prices of what you think will be an underperformer, and you can in reverse then long the index. So you're betting on the spread. You're betting on this particular company is not going to make it. I think the management is bad. I think the market conditions are really bad. And so you're shorting what you think is a relatively certain loser. You're longing the index. You try to cancel out the general market volatility, right? You can also make this a bit more fancy by adjusting for volatility, for beta, etc. But the general idea is you don't want to find the needle in the haystack, the one winner that might or might not outperform. Instead, you try to simply just get the haystack, right? Hope that there's no needle in there, and bet on the losers. Now in crypto, you can do this relatively easily, right? You can deposit your collateral. So let's say that would be Bitcoin or even a stable coin. You could then borrow whatever you think will underperform. So let's say, for example, you could look at the token inflation, right? You could look at how much does a certain token get printed. For example, for Avalanche, that's around 25% per annum or so quite a bit of token inflation. So you could bet, for instance, on Avalanche to underperform. So you borrow the Avalanche, you swap it then against what you think is the benchmark that will outperform it. So you borrow the Avalanche from, say, Aave. Aave is a borrowing lending platform. You swap it then against Bitcoin or Ethereum. And then you simply keep this running. And then after a while, when Avalanche has underperformed Ethereum for long enough and you want to close the position, then you simply just buy back the AVAX again from whatever you swapped it to. So that would be one approach. I think that's easier. It's an easier approach to generate alpha than trying to pick the few winners or trying to predict where the market is going. These things are still fun to do, right? But it's more likely than not that it's not going to generate anything. So that's simply just one of many strategies that I also explain more in the premium membership, by the way. But the takeaway of this video is really don't overestimate your own skills or the skills of other people, right? Everybody just does some fancy guesswork. Most people fail at this, and most people especially fail at this once you account for any kind of costs those people might be charging. If you found this useful, feel free to give this a thumbs up. Feel free to subscribe in case you haven't yet. And of course, see you in the next video. Bye-bye.